Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, dear listeners. It is a lovely day, although it's a bit humid, but it is late July in suburban Chicago. I don't know what I was expecting. Sounds like there are a few cicadas out. If you can hear the science fictional buzzing going on around me right now, that is, I believe, a cicada looking for love. Oh my, did this podcast just get a little saucy? Maybe it did. Today I'm taking a walk up to the library to pick up a few copies of a comic book, Mind Management, or Mind MGMT, which I checked out kind of on a whim based on a review I heard of the board game, which I'm not interested in. But I remember reading the first volume of the comic and thinking it was pretty good. Now I've now learned that the entire comic has finished its run, so this would be a good time to get it. I actually requested all 6 volumes from the library, so I'm just going to read them all. 36 issues of a comic. It's probably 2 hours of reading. 3 hours. I guess it depends how wordy it is. It's been a fun few days of gaming. I will share with you some of the new games I played lately, but I had Saturday and Sunday were 2 really robust days of gaming. I was going to have a Twilight Imperium day on Saturday, but unfortunately I was only able to get 2 people to commit to coming. And Twilight Imperium is one of those games where like 5 or 6 is the ideal player count, whereas 2 people just doesn't really cut it. So I changed tack at the last minute and we switched to Wingspan and Terraforming Mars, which are an excellent pair of games, and I had a delightful time. And then the next day I was invited to a friend's house and we played Vindication and Underwater Cities. So delightful combinations of games there. It was the play of Underwater Cities that got me thinking about my episode for today, because they asked me to bring my copy of Underwater Cities, and I have some fancy bits for Underwater Cities. I have little starfish, and I have little plants, and I have little tiny little beakers for science, and I have these like plastic things for the steel plast, and I have tiny little submarines for the player pieces. So I have a variety of upgraded bits for that game. And so I was thinking about, the theme is really important to me for a game, and I was thinking about why upgraded bits are fun. What is it about different kinds of upgrades, and why do they make the gaming experience more fun? So I listed out a few different kinds of upgrades and how I've used them and when I think they're fun. So the first is sort of general gameplay experience upgrades. Neoprene mats are a good start. Generally, all things being equal, I prefer a neoprene mat to a board, although I don't have very many of them. But a neoprene mat is easier to pick up cards and other things off of because it's got a little flex on it. It makes for a nicer playing surface on the table. I have a big neoprene mat that we use for my gaming table, and we just have that on the table. And it just makes for a slightly nicer playing surface all around. I guess there are some games where I'm not sure I prefer the neoprene mat to the board, because in parts it seems like they take up a little more room and they're a little harder to store, particularly because they don't fold very well. They roll, but then they get a permanent curve to them. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So that's the upgrade to the playing surface. Obviously, comfy chairs and a good way to eat make for solid play experience as well. The other thing that makes for a better play experience, I think, is carefully considered storage solutions. I really like a couple things about storing games, particularly complex games. Both my Terraforming Mars and my copy of Underwater Cities are stored this way. I'll have little plastic containers that I use to hold the different bits, and within those containers I have them set up within the box in a way that makes it easy to set the game up. So for instance, Underwater Cities, I have all the different bits in their own little plastic bins. So when we get out the game, we can get out these trays and pop the tops off, and we have the game ready to go. I also have bags for each player, and the bags have all of the things that are part of your components as a player. So they've got your player tokens, they've got your starting resources, they've got your initial personal aid, they've got your special guide. So that's a nice way to start the game, to be able to just hand a person a bag and it's got all the stuff in it that they need to start the game. I also have all of my bags labeled, which I spend more time than is probably reasonable looking through the bags that I have and making sure that each component is in a bag that's like the right size for that component, so it's not so small that it's hard to get it in, or it's fussy, but it's not so big that it takes up a whole bunch of room in the box when the component is much smaller. So I pick the bags pretty carefully around the components, and as such, it's very helpful to me when the bags are labeled. So I use my label maker and I label all the bags so that when it's time to put stuff away, it's easy to do so. You're able to just share the packing up by dumping out the bags, and all the bags are labeled and people can just stick stuff in. So that part I really like. So one more thing about ambiance that goes into play. I really like to add some ambiance to a game by adding sound. So one thing I'll do is there's a website called Melodice, which has a playlist compiled by users for each game you're playing. So if you're playing Terraforming Mars, there's a Terraforming Mars playlist. Underwater Cities is a different one, so on. So I don't have to do the work of compiling a playlist, but I'm able to then turn on music and have it be somewhat thematically connected. That's kind of fun. I like that. It's Melodice, Melodice. I think it's a play on the word melodies. Melodice. Does that make sense? I think so. All right, so that's how I generate ambiance for a gameplay session, if I have control over it. Of course, often, you're in a public space or you're in someone else's house, and I would never go so far as to suggest that I add music to someone else's house. Although if it's silent and I felt like listening to music, I wouldn't have problems saying, hey, can we turn on some music? But yeah, so that's ambiance. So let's talk about those fancy components. I mentioned Underwater Cities. I have little plastic tokens that represent all the different resources, and I have little submarines for the player tokens or the player pawns the player tokens instead of I have little submarines instead of the kind of square tiles that the game gives you. Those make for an interesting and more fun experience. But like I said, I also have resources that look kind of more like resources. I've also over time collected a variety of the resources that originally were published as part of Stegmaier's treasure box or token box. I don't remember exactly what he called them, but they were these boxes of tokens that were designed to look realistic and they could be used for a variety of games. So he came up with tokens that looked like little sheaves of wheat. So then any game where you have to have wheat, that those tokens would work. It is, he released these as, he called them treasure boxes, as a way of having people be able to have these sort of a variety of options for using these tokens in their games. Because the tokens themselves tend to be relatively generic. People need wheat for their farming games. That's a pretty common thing that you might buy or might need. So I missed out when Stegmaier made those token boxes originally, but all those things are still available in packages from the website Top Shelf Gamer. So I have, over the past 2 or 3 years, at various times when I've had birthday money, or more often when I've had a chance to ask for stuff, I've asked for little packets of these tokens in a variety of ways. So now I've got to the point where I bought this little shelf of drawers. It's got 15 drawers in it, and I have a variety of different token types in those drawers. There's wine bottles and cheeses and wheat and pumpkins and brick and stone and iron and ore, copper and gold. So there's all these different little tokens that look realistic, and I have enough variety of them now that many games where you're using tokens, you can use those things instead of the little chips that come in the game, which are obviously less thematic. And this seems ridiculous, right? But I will say the game experience of collecting these little tokens, having them to play with, it adds something to the experience. It's fun to have a little pile of gold in front of you instead of like little cardboard chits. Or like in Wingspan, I have plastic tokens for the Wingspan bits. So instead of playing with a little cardboard cherry, you get a little plastic cherry instead. It just looks nicer. So it is fun to have a variety of these different tokens because it adds to the thematic experience of the game, which is a weird thing to say because it really shouldn't, right? Like if I'm collecting gold, collecting a little metal cube that's got kind of goldish sheen isn't really more thematic than collecting a cardboard token that has a picture of gold on it. In both cases, these are tokens that represent a thing, but they aren't actually the thing. But I guess when when the verisimilitude is a little closer, the game feels a little more engaged or engaging. And I don't know, for the games that I really like, it's fun to have those options available as you're playing. And by assembling a set of sort of multi-use tokens, then when I get to the point that I want to play a particular game, I have those tokens available to me. It's a nice twist. The one other thing is money. Now, many games, there are several different ways that games track money. Sometimes they have little cardboard chits. Sometimes they have paper money. That's most common in like mass market games or games where you have a wide variety of denominations. Or there are some games that have little cardboard money. Once again, I like the thematic ability to use different kinds of tokens for different kinds of money. I have over the course of the last few years bought 3 different games that came with metal money. Vault Wars, a auction game from Floodgate Games, came with metal currency in 1s, 5s, and 10s. The weird pirate game Rattle Battle Grab the Loot came with little metal doubloons in 2 values. And the game Nanty Narking had an add-on set of metal tokens that you could get that were shillings and pounds. So I've taken all 3 of these sets of metal coins and set them and added them to my resource bin. So when we're playing a game that has money and it's possible to use one of these metal sets of currency, we use those instead of whatever's in the game. And it works really well for the most part. The one downside would be if we go to play one of those 3 games, either Nanty Narking or Vault Wars or Rattle Battle Grab the Loot, and I forget to grab the money from my bin. If I take one of those games elsewhere, then we end up without money to use, which is not ideal. Now, Nanty Narking actually has cardboard tokens in the game that you can substitute for money, so if you forget the metal ones, if you take the game somewhere and I forget to bring the metal ones, it'll still work, but the metal ones are so much better. So that's metal coins. So I'm curious, dear listener, what do you do to enhance your gameplay experience? Do you have things you've added? Do you have tricks you use? Do you have house rules? I've always enjoyed my friend Rob. He has a house rule that when people play Lords of Waterdeep with him, they have to use the correct names for the wooden tokens. You're not allowed to call a white wooden token a white cube. You have to call it a cleric. I've always enjoyed that approach. I think it makes for a fun game and just makes the experience of picking up those tokens a little bit better. I have seen people have 3D tokens of those, and that's definitely something I would consider getting if I ever got Lords of Waterdeep, but that's never really been one of the games in my collection, so maybe for another time. So that does give me back the question, what do you do to enhance your gameplay? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and let me know. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, thanks for joining me. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.